The year was 1492. A man stood on the deck of a wooden ship, staring at a horizon no European had dared to cross. He was celebrated, worshipped, and called the greatest explorer who ever lived. Schools named after him. Countries celebrated holidays in his honor. Statues built in every major city. But what if everything you were taught about this man was a lie? What if the real Christopher Columbus was not a brave hero sailing into the unknown, but a calculating, greedy, and brutal monster who launched one of the darkest chapters in human history? Stay with me because by the end of this video, you will never look at Columbus Day the same way again. Christopher Columbus was born in 1451 in Genoa, Italy. From a young age, he was obsessed with one thing, wealth. Not discovery, not adventure, wealth. He spent years trying to convince the kings of Portugal and Spain to fund his voyage west, promising them gold, spices, and slaves. Yes, slaves. This was part of his original pitch. He did not sail with a dream of connecting humanity. He sailed with a business plan. And when Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand of Spain finally agreed to fund him, Columbus was promised 10% of all riches found, governorship of all new lands, and the noble title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea. This was not an explorer's deal. This was a conqueror's contract. On August 3, 1492, Columbus departed from Palos de la Frontera, Spain, with 3 ships, the Nina, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, and a crew of about 90 men. After 70 days at sea, on October 12, 1492, land was spotted. But here is the first lie they taught you in school. Columbus did not discover America. When he arrived, he landed on a small island in the Bahamas, which the native Taino people called Guanahani. These were not empty lands. They were home to hundreds of thousands of people with their own languages, cultures, governments, and histories stretching back thousands of years. Columbus did not discover anything. He arrived uninvited into someone else's home. When Columbus first met the Taino people, he wrote about them in his own journal, and this is where his own words betray him. He described them as gentle, generous, and peaceful. He wrote that they brought food, water, and gifts to his crew without hesitation. And then in the very next sentence, Columbus wrote, and I want you to hear this carefully. He wrote that these people would make excellent servants and that with just 50 men, he could conquer them all and make them do whatever he wanted. This is not the writing of an explorer full of wonder. This is the writing of a man who saw human beings and immediately calculated how to exploit them. On his very first voyage, Columbus kidnapped several Taino people and brought them back to Spain to present to the royal court like trophies. He paraded them in front of the king and queen as proof of what he had found. Some of these people survived the journey. Most did not. But Columbus did not care. Because Columbus had promised gold, and the lands he found did not have nearly as much gold as he had promised. He was under pressure. He needed to deliver, and when gold was hard to find, he found something else to sell: human beings. On his second voyage in 1493, Columbus returned with 17 ships and over 1,200 men. This was no longer an exploration. This was an invasion. He established the first permanent European settlement in the Americas on the island of Hispaniola, present-day Haiti, and the Dominican Republic. And what followed was a systematic campaign of terror that is almost impossible to describe with words. Columbus introduced a system called the encomienda, a forced labor system where every Taino person above the age of 14 was required to deliver a specific quota of gold every 3 months. Every single person had to fill a hawksbell, a small copper bell with gold dust, and bring it to Columbus and his men. Every 3 months, without exception. And what happened to those who failed to meet the quota? Columbus ordered his men to cut off their hands. The hands were then hung around the necks of the victims as a warning to others. Historians estimate that during the first 2 years of Columbus's rule on Hispaniola, tens of thousands of Taino people had their hands cut off for failing to find enough gold in rivers that simply did not have enough gold to fill those quotas. People were being mutilated for failing an impossible task. And Columbus watched. And Columbus approved. And Columbus continued. But the violence did not stop there. Columbus and his men unleashed dogs, large, trained war dogs, on Taino villages. They burned villages to the ground. They killed men, women, and children. They used Taino people for sword practice. Spanish soldiers would make bets with each other about who could cut a man in half with a single blow. These are not exaggerations. These are documented accounts written by Bartolomé de las Casas, a Spanish priest who witnessed these events with his own eyes and spent the rest of his life trying to tell the world what Columbus had done. Las Casas wrote in horrifying detail about the massacres, the torture, and the systematic destruction of an entire people. The Taino population of Hispaniola before Columbus arrived is estimated to have been between 300,000 and 1 million people. Within 50 years of Columbus's arrival, just 50 years, the Taino people of Hispaniola were functionally extinct. An entire civilization, their language, their traditions, their knowledge, their art, wiped from the face of the earth. This was not an accident of history. This was not simply disease spreading beyond anyone's control. This was the direct result of policies designed and implemented by Christopher Columbus. Genocide. The word is genocide. Even the Spanish government eventually had enough. Columbus was so brutal, so corrupt, and so incompetent as a governor that in 1500 the Spanish crown sent a royal investigator named Francisco de Bobadilla to Hispaniola. What Bobadilla found shocked even the hardened officials of a colonial empire. He found Columbus had been ruling through pure terror. He found men hanging from gallows throughout the settlement. He found records of mass executions. He arrested Columbus, put him in chains, and shipped him back to Spain in disgrace. Columbus spent 6 weeks in prison. The man celebrated as history's greatest explorer was arrested by his own government for crimes against humanity. Columbus made for voyages to the Americas. He never once set foot on the mainland of North America. He never reached what is now the United States. He landed in the Caribbean, in Central America, and the northern coast of South America. And in every single place he went, he left behind the same legacy: slavery, forced labor, mass death, and the complete destruction of indigenous civilizations. Columbus did not open a new world. He closed ancient ones. So why is this man celebrated? Why are there statues? Why is there a federal holiday in the United States named after him? The answer is complicated, and it says more about us than it does about Columbus. The myth of Columbus as a hero was largely created in the 1800s, centuries after his death. Washington Irving, the same author who wrote The Legend of Sleepy Hollow, wrote a wildly inaccurate and romanticized biography of Columbus in 1828 that invented much of the legend we still repeat today. The flat earth story, the idea that Columbus bravely sailed when everyone thought he would fall off the edge, that was invented by Washington Irving. It was fiction presented as fact, and it stuck. Italian-American communities in the late 1800s pushed for Columbus Day as a way to celebrate their heritage at a time when Italian immigrants faced intense discrimination in America. Columbus became a symbol of Italian pride and immigrant identity. In 1937, Franklin D. Roosevelt made Columbus Day a federal holiday. By that point, the myth was so deeply embedded in American culture that questioning it felt almost unpatriotic. Schools taught the rhyme. In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, as if it were a celebration rather than a countdown to catastrophe. But the truth has always been there for those willing to look. Columbus's own journals, the writings of Las Casas, the historical records of the Spanish crown, the archaeological evidence, the genetic studies of indigenous populations. All of it tells the same story. Columbus was not a hero who got lost and stumbled upon a new world. Columbus was a man driven by greed who stumbled upon civilizations that had existed for thousands of years and destroyed them in pursuit of gold and personal glory. Today, more and more cities and states across America are replacing Columbus Day with Indigenous Peoples Day, a recognition that the history of this continent did not begin in 1492, and that the people who were already here deserve to be remembered. Statues of Columbus have been torn down, removed, and relocated to museums. The conversation is changing. The myth is crumbling. And that is not an attack on history. That is history finally being told honestly. Christopher Columbus did not discover America. He invaded it. He did not bring civilization to the New World. He brought chains. He was not a hero. He was the architect of a genocide that killed millions and erased entire civilizations from human memory. The ships were real. The bravery of the voyage was real. But the man inside those ships, the real Christopher Columbus, was something far darker than any school textbook ever dared to tell you. Now you know the real story, and you cannot unknow it.